Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Friday, August 6th, and we're breaking down this massive 14-game slate that we have over on DraftKings today. And you would think with 28 teams in the slate, we'd have a boatload of good pitching options, but that is simply not the case today. Even the guys I do have listed here on the screen right now, I'm not overly confident in really any of them due to their price points or matchups or things like that. So it's going to be a little bit tough today, but there's lots of good offenses to pick from, and it's a big slate. It's Friday. Looking forward to it. Should be a pretty good day. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to follow me over on social media, you know where to do so using the handles in the bottom hand corners of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, become an official Patreon member over there. Link is down below in the description for that. But you get access into my entire spreadsheet, lots of extra content, including the projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, all that fun stuff. Link can be found down below. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the prize that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on Prize Picks, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 as an instant deposit match up to $100. So it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you at either prizepicks.com, or you can use a link down below. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the pitchers, then move on to the bats. And like I was saying, guys, it's a big slate with some decent pitchers, but the matchups are kind of gross for a few of these guys, and I feel like quite a few pitchers are overpriced on today's slate. Like, yes, I have Corbin Burnes, Chris Bassitt, German Marquez, and Kyle Gibson listed on here, but I'm not really overly confident in these guys. And if we're just looking down the slate here, we have Zach Greinke, but he's close to $10,000. He's not a big strikeout guy. Adam Wainwright, close to $10,000. Like, they're solid pitchers, but at those price points, they're kind of getting priced out to where they can hit value on most nights. Alek Manoah's a fun, exciting pitcher, but he's around $9,500 versus Boston. I don't really want to go that route. Kyle Muller, $9,200. Like, there's just a bunch of solid, okay pitchers, but the matchups aren't great and they're kind of overpriced. So we're kind of stuck with this little group I have here. Obviously, if you want to venture off to some other pitchers at lower ownership, because I assume these are going to be the chalkier pitchers on today's slate, you can certainly do that. But as of right now, this is kind of what I'm landing on. So we'll start up top with the ace of the slate. It's Corbin Burnes at $10,000. He definitely hasn't been good as he was earlier in the season, but I still think he's a very overall solid pitcher. So his numbers are fine in the season. The problem is we're in a hitter-friendly park in Milwaukee, and the Giants are on the road here, and they've been a great team all season long. They just got Brandon Belt back, so that's some lefty power right in the middle of the lineup. And the Giants are a good team. I don't really like picking on them too much. I know Corbin Burnes is a very good pitcher, but I do get a little bit worried about the matchup here. There's no implied team total out yet, but if I had to guess, Corbin Burnes is such a good pitcher. I'd assume the Giants aren't going to be super high here, but maybe low fours to upper threes. Don't think it'll get quite to 4.5 here, because there's some decent arms in the Milwaukee bullpen. But a 7.5 K prop here, and his numbers on the season, like I was mentioning, are still very good at 36% K rate, 2.2 xFIP, 2.5 Sierra. Doesn't give up much power whatsoever. Has a lean to the ground balls, only a 25% hard contact rate allowed, and only 0.3 homers per 9. Like I was saying, though, I don't love the matchup here versus the Giants, but they do strike out quite a bit versus righties, over a 25% K rate, but that comes with over a 200 ISO, 110 WRC plus, and a 334 WOBA. So we gotta be a little bit careful here, but projection-wise, he's my top pitcher on the slate. Now, that does not mean you have to play him because he's the highest projected pitcher, but, I mean, given the other options that we have, he does look pretty good tonight. And then dropping out a Chris Bassitt, $200 cheaper. He definitely gets the softer matchup, and it's also a very pitcher-friendly park in Texas. Now, he doesn't have quite the strikeout upside that Corbin Burnes has, but he's still a very overall solid, safe pitcher, in my opinion. Just not quite exciting, but only a 3.06 implied team total against him, which, as of right now, is the lowest on the slate. That could change. I mean, we'll have to see what the Giants are, but I cannot imagine the Giants would be that low. I mean, obviously, it's a tough matchup, but they're still a good overall team. Definitely way better than Texas is. I mean, Texas is just it's a putrid offense right now, especially with no Joey Gallo. I know Joey Gallo isn't exactly the best bet out there, but he has a ton of power, and obviously he's going to be the key point of any lineup, and you just take him out of the equation. I mean, that lineup gets rough real quick if you're just looking down the list there. And if we're looking at Chris Bassitt's numbers this season, I mean, compared to Corbin Burnes, are obviously not going to look that great, but a 25% K rate, 3.81 Sierra, xFIP straight below 4. The ERA looks pretty good at 3.28. He can limit the power at 142 ISO, 43% ground ball rate, low hard contact rate allowed, and about a homer per 9. So, I mean, he's just a fine overall solid pitcher, not a guy that's super exciting. I wish he was cheaper. I think Chris Bassitt's probably like a more of a low 9K pitcher, but relative to the slate, I think it makes sense to where they priced him. But for $200 more, it's kind of lean towards trying to get that high strikeout upside that Corbin Burns has. But if you want to play both of these guys, that's certainly possible. I was playing around some dummy lineups, and there's some pretty cheap bats tonight to make things work in good spots. So if you want to double spend it for a pitcher, I have no problem with that because the cheap options today are pretty gross, and even the mid-range doesn't look that great either. Now, if we're looking at the Rangers splits versus righties this season, you got to keep in mind a lot of this does come with Joey Gallo, but even then, it's pretty bad. About a 25% K rate, only a 156 team ISO, a 85 WRC plus, and a 293 WOBA. So, pitcher-friendly park in Oakland. I think Bassett is a overall very safe, solid play. Should be able to get you around 20-some points, if not more, if he picks up the win, which the Oakland A's are in a pretty good spot offensively tonight versus Fulte. So I would be very surprised if he can't pick up the win. He's a very heavy favorite, 71% chance for the dub tonight. Then dropping down to some SP2 options here, which are definitely going to be carrying some risk, but that's why they're cheaper. So, but German Marquez, $8,400 gets a fantastic matchup versus Miami. The only problem is we're playing in Coors Field, which is obviously the best place to hit. It's going to be hot in Coors, so you got to be a little bit careful here. But Marquez is a very solid pitcher. Miami's lineup is bad. I said this like 5 times now since the trade happened, but they don't have Sterling Marte anymore. No Adam Duvall. Really, the only bat you have to worry about is Jazz here. Outside of Jazz, it's really bad. I mean, I could probably pull up the list here. All right, so I was able to pull up their team sheet here, and just looking at the lineup, we have Miguel Rojas leading off, Jazz Chisholm, like he's the one good bat there. Jesus Aguilar has some pop, but I mean, like, I'd prefer him versus a lefty. Lewis Brinson, when Lewis Brinson's your cleanup hitter, you definitely have some problems going on. Brian Anderson, Jorge Alfaro, Brian De La Cruz, Alex Jackson, then obviously you have the pitcher. So we have 8 righties in the lineup. Now that's just projected. Obviously things can change, but I like Marquez versus righties. And if you're going to give me a righty-heavy lineup with a team total of 4.2 in Coors Field, I think in tournaments, Marquez is certainly in play. I could even stretch that to cash games. I mean, a 4.2 implied team total has to be one of the lowest I've ever seen in Coors Field outside of like a Jacob deGrom start or anything like that. So I think Marquez, who's a very solid pitcher, around 25% K rate on the season. He's able to limit the power, gets a good amount of ground balls, 53% ground ball rate, and less than a homer per 9. I realize it's Coors Field, but Miami's a team that is going to struggle the rest of the season and on the year. Only a 142 team ISO to righties, 90 WRC plus, and a 25% K rate. So New Marquez, even though he's in Coors, is in a pretty good spot tonight. And then after that, I was just trying to find a cheaper pitcher that I thought would be somewhat viable. And I don't even really want to talk about Kyle Gibson, but at $7,400, I think he's an okay play here. He's not a big strikeout guy, but I'm not overly concerned about the Mets lineup. He's only got a 4.2 implied team total against him. He's a slight favorite here, 5.5 K prop. But I will say, I'm not a big fan of Kyle Gibson. I mean, the ERA is fine at 2.86, but his xFIP's above 4, so is the SIERA. That's close to 4.5, only a 20.3% K rate. He does walk some guys, but he limits the power. That's one good thing. And he gets a lot of ground balls, so I mean, less than a 100 ISO given up, 50% ground ball rate, less than a homer per 9, only 32% hard contact rate. I mean, the Mets it's an okay spot here. Yeah, they have Javier Baez now, but he's just a human whiff machine, so I mean, that could be a couple strikeouts there for Kyle Gibson. I'm not overly excited about it, but if you have to get dip a little bit into the 7K range for an SP2 today, I think you could probably do worse than Kyle Gibson. But I think it's going to be pretty much it for the pitching for the most part, so we'll move right over to my favorite stacks tonight. And we're going to start with the Houston Astros here in a pretty good spot versus Bailey Ober, because if we're looking at his numbers this season, he has really struggled in the power department. If we're looking at his overall splits versus both lefties and righties, the xFIP's not bad at 4.07, and the ERA is pretty close to 5, and a 25.8% K rate is not too bad. But if we're looking specifically at the power, he's giving up a 248 ISO on the season, a 43% fly ball rate, a hard contact rate close to 40%, and over 2 homers per 9. So the Astros, obviously a great hitting team, I think are going to certainly be in play here. They have a team total of 5.8, which is one of the highest on the slate today. And guys like Jose Altuve, Michael Brantley, Yuli Gurriel, Jordan Alvarez, Carlos Correa, Cal Tucker, all these guys are going to be in play. Even Diaz at that price point, who's eligible at first base and third base. Now, if we're looking for some of my favorite plays in this lineup, Michael Brantley at $3,000. That's just an absolute joke of a price tag. I have no idea why DraftKings hates Michael Brantley so much, but a guy that's batting .332 in the season with a WOBA close to 400 and a WRC plus over 145, hits in a prime spot in the order on one of the best offenses in baseball. There's absolutely no reason at all he should be this cheap. Like, he's not even that far off of Diaz's price point. So I love Michael Brantley in cash games today. I almost feel like he's a lock for that. I'll probably make him the thumbnail in this video because you guys know I'm a sucker for Michael Brantley. He's the logo for me on the DraftKings app. But yeah, loving the Astros today, specifically Michael Brantley though. Like in cash games, you got to get him in. Lefties look really good versus Ober, so Cal Tucker, and that's kind of pretty much it for the lefties besides Jordan Alvarez. And even then, he's not overly expensive either at $4,500. So if you don't want to full stack the Astros, I think maybe a lefty mini stack in the outfield here does look pretty good tonight. Moving on to the Atlanta Braves here, they come in a pretty good spot here versus Eric Fetty, and it took them a while to get that stat going last night, but last time I looked, I'm recording this at like 11:30 p.m., so I think the game is still going on, but they had like 7 or 8 runs, and the pitcher that was, the relief pitcher, like walked in 3 straight guys. He had the bases loaded, and he just kept walking in runs. I'm not sure how that's ending up. I think last I saw, Freddie Freeman was up bases loaded, so I'm kind of crossing my fingers he had a grand slam there. But anyway, they find themselves in a good spot here versus Eric Fetty. While he's not the worst pitcher on the road, he's not that great. He's pretty average at best. It's going to be in Atlanta. It's going to be hitter-friendly conditions. It's going to be pretty hot, around 90 degrees, hot and humid down in Atlanta this time of the season, so you can definitely sign me up for all these Braves here versus a very mediocre pitcher. And the Washington bullpen is obviously not that great either, so they're all in a pretty good spot. For the most part, they're not overly expensive either. Yes, there's some expensive guys like Ozzie Albies and Freddie Freeman and Austin Riley's getting up there in price tag, but if you got the money for them, I think this does look like a pretty good stack tonight. Jock Peterson, he hits right-handed pitching pretty well leading off. I think he's an excellent choice. You could play him in cash games. Ozzie Albies obviously a fantastic option, but again, very expensive. I do prefer him versus lefties. Freddie Freeman crushes right-handed pitching. Just if you're full stacking the Braves, really hard to leave off a guy like Freddie. Austin Riley, Adam Duvall, Horace Soler, Dansby Swanson, Stephen Vogt. All these guys are excellent options tonight. They are a bit pricey, but if you got the money for them, they're in a very good spot. Going to the Cincinnati Reds here, I always love using the Reds whenever they're facing a pretty average pitcher in Great American Small Park, as in the summertime, and just overall, it's one of the best places to hit in all of baseball. But this time of the year, hot and humid down in Cincinnati. I don't live too far away, so yeah, I can confirm that myself. It's usually pretty humid this time of the season. And JT Brubaker, well, I don't think he's the worst pitcher out there. He can definitely give some power, and in this ballpark, that's definitely not going to suit a guy like him well. So you can pretty much use the entire lineup here. The Reds popped off yesterday very early on versus Will Crowe. I think the first 3 innings, they had 7 runs against him, and after that, like a complete goose egg. When they had those 7 runs earlier, I was thinking, like, we're going to get 2 touchdowns scored in this game, if not more, maybe even an extra field goal the way they were hitting. Unfortunately, it came to a halt very quick, but this is a very good offense. Jonathan India, Jesse Winker, he crushes right-handed pitching. I mean, on the season, he's got some of the best overall numbers in the entire league versus righties. Nick Castellanos just came back yesterday. He's still a little bit too cheap here at $4,000. DraftKings will catch up to that soon, so don't be surprised if we see him at $5K sooner rather than later, so take advantage of that price point while you can right now. Obviously, I prefer him versus lefties, but when he's at that price point, it's really hard to pass him up, especially if you're doing a full-on stack with the Cincinnati Reds here. Joey Votto, he is now $6,000, but I'm pretty sure homers pretty much every single slate now. He did last night, so if we just want to get the automatic homer there, you got Joey Votto hitting cleanup here in a nice lefty on righty matchup versus JT Brubaker. Kyle Farmer, Tyler Naquin, Eugenio Suarez, and Tucker Barnhart, they're kind of lineup fillers for the most part, but they do come in at decent price points, and some of these guys do have some decent pop versus righties. But the Cincinnati Reds, team total of 5.4 here. If we're looking at Brubaker's numbers on the season, obviously not a terrible pitcher like I was mentioning earlier, but he does give up over a 200 ISO on the season. Kind of an annoying ground ball rate, close to 46%, but close to 2 homers allowed per 9. Versus lefties, he gives up a 179 ISO, and versus righties, a 224 ISO. So you can pretty much use just about anybody here, and I definitely think a dong or two can certainly be hit off of JT Brubaker tonight. And then moving on to a very expensive stack here, but I feel like we at least have to talk about them because I'm assuming they're going to have one of the highest implied team totals on the slate here versus Marco Gonzalez, a soft-tossing lefty that gives up plenty of power versus either lefties or righties. And we have a lot of good bats in this lineup now. They're very expensive, so you'll probably have to find a value pitcher to make this work or a very cheap stack to pair them with. But LeMahieu, not a big power guy, but is hit for contact well versus lefties or righties. Anthony Rizzo. The lefties are going to be mainly tournament options for me because everyone kind of tries to like skip over lefty and lefty matchups in MLB DFS, which I get because it's never great because some of these guys don't hit lefties really well and obviously prefer them versus righties. But if you like a stack, you're thinking that pitcher, you're assuming at least, that pitcher won't last too long into this game, so let's see a righty at some point anyway. So I'm not really one to be too scared of lefty on lefty matchups. Like last night, Freddie Freeman, lefty on lefty matchup, he still ended up doing just fine. Like, I'm not overly concerned about that as much as some other people are. Aaron Judge kills lefties. Giancarlo Stanton, I could see him being pretty popular in cash games tonight because he is just way, way cheaper compared to the other big bats in this lineup. I mean, obviously, he's kind of right on par with a guy like Gleyber Torres, Ronaldo Odor, but I mean, Stanton should probably be closer to Aaron Judge in price, so especially versus lefty. Like, he crushes lefties for power, so Stanton looks like a very good option. Joey Gallo is fine in tournaments. Finally hit his first homer with the Yankees last night. I ended up seeing that on the Twitter feed there. Didn't see it live, but this entire lineup is certainly going to be play. If I had to guess their team total, probably like 5.5, close to 6 here. I mean, Marco Gonzalez is a guy which Maybe he's not the worst pitcher out there, but he's a guy that's got a xFIP over 5, K rate below 20%, a 240 ISO given up on the season, and over 2 homers allowed per 9. If we look at specifically versus lefties, obviously the numbers are going to look a little bit better at 171 ISO and about 1.5 homers per 9 and close to a 40% hard contact rate, which is still pretty bad. So you can still use the lefties here, but versus righties is where he's really going to struggle. A 48% fly ball rate, 2.5 homers allowed per 9, and a 309 ISO with a 5.6 xFIP. So the righties look really good today, and Stanton got to be one of the better plays on the entire slate today at that price point. And then staying in division here, I like the Tampa Bay Rays quite a bit here versus John Means. Now, I don't think John Means is the worst pitcher out there, but he really struggles with fly balls, and he gives up homers. And there's a lot of guys in this lineup that can hit left-handed pitching pretty well. And it's a massive park boost going from the Trop in Tampa to Baltimore and Camden Yards, which is one of the best places to hit in all of baseball. So I'm definitely liking the Rays here quite a bit. Now, this is an expensive stack, so again, you might have to find a cheaper pitcher, just do a mini stack here to make this work, but guys like Randy Arozarena, he hits lefties pretty well. Wander Franco, we don't have a huge sample size on the guy, but he hasn't really been exactly that great ever since going to the big leagues. A 244 average with a 301 WOB and a 150 ISO. So obviously there's room for improvement there, and down the road we know he's got all the upside in the world, but as of right now, $5,000 does seem a bit overpriced in my opinion. Nelson Cruz, he's kind of like the main target here. We know he crushes left-handed pitching, so if you have the money for him, great. One of the overall top projection plays on the slate. Yandy Diaz, Austin Meadows, lefty and lefty matchup there. But again, if you like the stack, you're assuming that starting pitcher's probably not going to last too long, and he'll see a righty at some point anyway. And once he sees that righty, you're probably going to wish he was in your lineup. Manuel Margot, decent splits versus lefties, and he's pretty cheap. Brandon Lau, he could be one of those guys you might want to leave off, but if you're doing like full contrarian here, I can imagine he's probably going to be like one of the lowest guys owned in this lineup just because he's that expensive versus lefty and should be hitting a little bit lower in the order. And Mike Zunino, G-Man Choi kind of lineup fillers at the end there, but I do think the Tampa Bay Rays are in a pretty good spot on the road in Camden Yards. And if we're looking at John Means splits this season, specifically versus righties, he's got a 50% fly ball rate, 1.9 homers allowed per 9, doesn't give up much hard contact, and his xFIP and K rates are still fine, but I'm mainly just kind of hunting some homers here out of the Tampa Bay Rays righties for the most part. And actually staying in the same game, just on the opposite side here, I had the Baltimore Orioles as more of a wild card stack. I don't have full confidence in the O's here, but they're a team that I like targeting versus lefties. And the last time the Orioles faced Ryan Yarbrough, this was in the Trop, which is obviously a major downgrade from them going to Camden Yards, one of the best places to hit in all of baseball, to one of the best pitchers parks in baseball. And Ryan Yarbrough, not a terrible pitcher, but he's a soft tossing lefty. And this is a team that surprisingly does grade out pretty well versus left-handed pitching. Cedric Mullins, he's a lefty, but you can still play him in lefty-on-lefty matchups. He's been one of the better hitters in baseball this season. Obviously not a huge power threat, but he's just been solid all around. He's got speed, hits for a high average, has some decent amount of pop in his lineup. But guys like Austin Hayes, Trey Mancini, Ryan Mountcastle, all three of those guys have ISOs above 200 versus left-handed pitching this season. And guys like Austin Hayes and Ryan Mountcastle come at pretty cheap price points. And last time they did play Ryan Yarbrough, I believe they put up 5 or 6 runs versus him. Then earlier start in the season, he kind of struggled versus the Orioles as well. So I'm actually kind of a fan of this in tournaments. Obviously, it's very risky because it's the Orioles, but they're at home and they're in the same great hitters park that the Tampa Bay Rays are. And if we like the Rays for those reasons, I think the Orioles is going to apply to them a little bit as well. Now, they're not on the road, so you don't get those guaranteed nothing at bats, but I'm assuming they're probably going to train in this game, so it wouldn't be too much of a big deal here. I know it's only a 4.3 implied team total, but if you're looking for a sneaky stack tonight, I don't think the Orioles are in a bad spot here versus a soft tossing lefty in Ryan Yarbrough. You might be able to find some cheap homers in Hayes, Ryan Mountcastle, maybe even Anthony Santander as well. And then at the bottom of the order, Pedro Severino's got some pop versus lefties. Maikel Franco, not a big power guy whatsoever, but he can hit lefties decently well. And then Urias if you're looking for a cheap shortstop. But with that being said, guys, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so already. You do enjoy the content that you are watching. I do cover the sports as well, including the NFL, NASCAR, and the NBA. And if you follow me over on social media, you're able to do so using the handles in the bottom hand corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon and become an official member over there, link is down below in the description for that. But you get access into my entire spreadsheet here, which has a ton of information that I use each and every single day to help build myself lineups. I got projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, my cheat sheet, which has all the individual bats. I know some of you like the individual bats over than the stack, so there's your option there. It's got all the projections listed on there as well. Yeah, all that fun stuff can be found down below, and it also has a Discord community and all that stuff. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. It's daily fantasy sports simplified. It's just you versus the projections and props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee and you do use code CPENN and tell them I sent you, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. That's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPENN and tell them I sent you? At either prizepicks.com or use the link down below in the description. But I think that's pretty much it. I will stop rambling, and I hope you guys enjoyed the start to your weekend.